Welcome to Chapter 1, where we're going to take a fascinating journey through human work history. Today, we're exploring how dramatically different our current working system in the world is from virtually all of human existence. Think about this. Your great great grandparents probably lived and worked in ways that are way more similar to people from 1,000 years ago than to us today. What we're going to examine is three major transitions in human work. From hunter-gatherer, which lasted hundreds of thousands of years, to agriculture, which dominated for about 10,000 years, and finally to the beginnings of industrialization. This historical perspective will help you understand many of the workplace issues we face today. They didn't just appear out of nowhere, but evolved from these earlier work patterns. As we go through this material, I want you to think about how each period shaped not just what people did for work, but how they thought about work, time, and their place in society. These ideas are still with us today. Let's start with a mind-blowing perspective. For approximately 200,000 years of modern human existence, and over 2 million years if we include early human ancestors, people survived through hunting and gathering. To put this in perspective, if human history were a 24-hour day compressed, agriculture would only appear in the last hour and industrialization in the last few minutes. During this fast period, human survival depended on three main activities. First, gathering, collecting plants, fruits, nuts, insects, grubs, reptiles. This was actually the most reliable food source. Second, hunting animals, large and small. Think mammoths all the way down to rabbits. And third, scavenging, finding animal carcasses that have died naturally or been killed by other predators. Here's what's crucial to understand. These weren't primitive people stumbling around looking for food. They had incredibly sophisticated knowledge of their environments. They knew which plants were edible in which seasons, how to track animals, how to predict weather patterns, that many of us today could not survive a week in their environment, even with modern gear. This long period of gathering and hunting established some fundamental patterns in human work that we'll see echoing throughout history, including gender-based divisions of labor and the integration of work with daily life. What made humans unique during this period wasn't just their ability to find food, but their technological innovation and communication skills. The development of tools was absolutely revolutionary. So we're not talking about crude rocks. By the late Paleolithic period, humans were making sophisticated bows and arrows, spear throwers, scrapers, needles, and even musical instruments. So let me give you an example of the skill involved. Making a simple stone hand axe requires selecting exactly the right type of stone, then delivering precisely aimed blows at exactly the right angle with exactly the right force. Get any of these wrong and you'd ruin hours of work. This level of technical skill rivals anything we do today. But even more important was communication. Imagine trying to coordinate a group hunt of a mammoth without language. It would be impossible. So humans developed sophisticated verbal and nonverbal communication systems that allowed them to work together, share knowledge about tool making, and pass down crucial environmental information across generations. The cave paintings we find aren't just art, they're often instructional materials related to hunting. Some show animals pierced by spears, possibly serving as a ritual practice and teaching tools. This shows that even 30,000 years ago, humans were thinking systematically about improving their work performance. Here is a sobering statistic. Less than 1% of today's world population still lives primarily by gathering and hunting. That's fewer than 75,000 people out of nearly 8 billion. These societies are essentially extinct, which makes studying the few remaining ones incredibly valuable for understanding our past. The Kungsan of the Kalahari Desert have been studied intensively by anthropologists because they represent one of the last intact gathering hunting societies. Their ancestors have lived in the region for an estimated 30,000 years. Imagine that continuity. However, even as they are being rapidly integrated into the modern cash economy and losing their lifestyle. Why study them? Because they give us a window into how the vast majority of humans live for most of our species' existence. Understanding this baseline helps us see just how radical the changes have been in human work patterns, and it also challenges some of our assumptions about work and prosperity. As we will see, the Kungsan's lifestyle offers some surprising insights into questions like, how much do people really need to work to survive? What does affluence actually mean? How do you organize work without bosses' schedules or wage labor? The Kungsan subsistence strategy is remarkably sophisticated. They incorporate 85 different plant species into their diet. That is more dietary diversity than most Americans have. Of these, 25 are eaten regularly. The mongogo nut is particularly important because it provides high quality plant protein, and it's abundant and reliable. Now, there's something that surprises people. Gathering provides 2.4 times more calories than hunting. So why do we usually hear about hunter-gatherer societies instead of gatherer-hunter societies? This reflects gender bias in how we think about work. Hunting is done primarily by men, gathering primarily by women. Because hunting seems more exciting and dramatic, it gets more attention, even though gathering is actually more important for survival. This introduces us to a key concept we will see throughout this course, ascribed characteristics. These are traits you're born with that you cannot change, like gender, or race, or family background. The Kungsan assign work based on gender, not individual aptitude or interest. Men hunt, women gather. This pattern of organizing work by ascribed characteristics rather than ability or preference has been incredibly persistent throughout human history. Interestingly, this gender division makes some biological sense in gathering hunting societies. Pregnancy, nursing, and childcare did limit women's mobility for hunting. But as we will see later in the course, gender-based work divisions persist even when the biological justifications disappear. Here's where the Kungsan really challenge our assumptions about work and prosperity. Anthropologist Richard Lee found that they spend only 12 to 19 hours a week on subsistence activities. Compare that to our standard 40-hour work week. What do they do with the rest of the time? Well, they socialize, they dance, they participate in religious ceremonies, they rest, and enjoy each other's company. Marshall Solins calls them the original affluent society. But their affluence isn't based on having lots of stuff. It's based on having abundant leisure time. This is a completely different definition of prosperity than what we are used to. Why can they afford this lifestyle? Well, it's because they have virtually no material possessions. Everything they own has to be carried when they move to a new area every few weeks, which they must do as local resources become depleted. This makes material goods a burden rather than a benefit. Imagine if everything you owned had to fit into a single backpack. This nomadic lifestyle also affects family size. Women typically space their children about 4 years apart because they can only carry one small child during moves. They accomplish this through extended breastfeeding, which reduces fertility, and sometimes through less pleasant methods like abortion or infanticide. This might seem harsh, but it prevents population growth from exceeding the environment's carrying capacity. It is a form of sustainability that industrial societies still struggle with. The Kungsan have developed sophisticated social systems to handle life's uncertainties. With no stored wealth to fall back on, anyone can suddenly find themselves unable to work due to illness, injury, or bad luck. So they've created a culture based on sharing and mutual support. If you're successful at gathering or hunting, you are expected to share with others who had bad luck that day. This isn't charity, it's insurance. You help others today knowing they will help you tomorrow when you need it. You might be the one who needs assistance next time. This creates strong social bonds and ensures that no one starves as long as everyone in the group has food. This brings up an interesting question. Can we even call what the Kungsan do work in our modern sense? They don't separate work time from leisure time the way we do. Gathering and hunting are social activities done with family and friends. There's no boss telling them what to do or when to do it. The activities that provide their livelihood are integrated into the social and spiritual fabric of their lives. This integration of work and life might sound appealing, but let's not romanticize it. Most of us would find it very difficult to live without material comforts and security we are used to. The Kungsan face real hardship: high infant mortality, periodic food shortages, vulnerability to disease, and isolation from the wider world. Their lifestyle is disappearing because many Kungsan are choosing to join the modern economy when given the opportunity. But studying them gives us this crucial insight. If wants and expectations are kept modest, humans do not need to work constantly to survive. Around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, human life took a dramatic turn that was every bit as revolutionary as industrialization would be later. People in several parts of the world, the Middle East, China, Mexico, Peru, independently began deliberately cultivating plants instead of just gathering wild ones. Well, this wasn't a sudden shift, but a gradual process that most likely took centuries. People continued gathering and hunting while slowly learning to plant, tend, and harvest crops. But eventually, agriculture became the dominant mode of subsistence. What caused the shift? We're still debating this, but it was probably some combination of population growth putting pressure on wild resources, climate change at the end of the last ice age affecting plant and animal populations, and perhaps humans becoming so successful at hunting that they depleted large game animals. The warming climate after the Ice Age definitely helped. It extended the growing season and expanded the area suitable for agriculture. But humans may have also contributed to the extinction of many large animals through overhunting. There's evidence that mammoths, giant ground sloths, and other megafauna disappeared shortly after humans arrived in various regions. Whatever the exact cause, this transition set humanity on a completely different path. Instead of moving with the seasons and following natural cycles, people began staying in one place and trying to control nature rather than just adapting to it. Early agricultural techniques were quite diverse and sophisticated. Horticulture used simple tools like hoes and digging sticks to turn the soil, which brought nutrients to the surface and controlled weeds. Slash and burn agriculture involved cutting down trees and burning them to create fertile clearings. The ash provided excellent fertilizer, and the irrigation system allowed farming in areas that would otherwise be too dry. Each of these techniques had different implications for how societies were organized. Slash and burn require communities to move every few years as soil fertility declined, so they remained somewhat nomadic. Irrigation required permanent settlements and coordinated labor to build and maintain the water systems. But all form of agriculture had one thing in common. They could support much denser populations than gathering and hunting. A single acre of farmland could feed far more people than an acre of wild plants and animals. This was both agriculture's great advantage and in some ways its curse. The ability to support larger populations led to population growth, which created pressure to farm more intensively, which led to more population growth, a cycle that continues today. But agriculture also required much more labor than gathering and hunting. The Kung San worked 12 to 19 hours per week. Farmers often worked from dawn to dusk during planting and harvest seasons. This trade-off, more food, bigger population, but longer working hours and less leisure, has shaped human societies ever since. The demographic changes brought by agriculture were staggering. Where a gathering hunting band might include 25 to 50 people, agricultural villages could support hundreds or even thousands. This population density had profound consequences for how work was organized and how societies functioned. For the first time in human history, there were enough people to support significant occupational specialization. Instead of everyone doing the same work, gathering and hunting, some people could become full-time potters, metal workers, priests, or rulers. Specialization made possible much more sophisticated technology and more complex forms of social organization. But agricultural societies required much more human labor. Where the Kung San worked 12 to 19 hours a week, farmers worked 60 to 80 hours a week during busy season. Agriculture is more reliable than gathering and hunting in some ways. You can predict when your harvest will come in, but it's also more demanding and less flexible. This labor intensity had important implications for family structure and population control. While gathering hunting societies needed to limit their population to avoid overwhelming their environment, agricultural societies often wanted larger families to provide more workers. Children became economic assets rather than just burdens to be carried. Agriculture maintained the gender-based division of labor we saw in gathering hunting societies, but the specific tasks changed. In most horticulture societies, men were responsible for the heavy work of clearing land, cutting down trees, breaking new ground. Women typically handled the more time-consuming day-to-day tasks, planting, weeding, and harvesting. Interestingly, this meant that women's work was often more crucial to daily survival, just as with gathering and hunting. But men's work was more visible and dramatic. Clearing forests requires significant physical strength and is often dangerous. This visibility may help explain why men's work often received more social recognition, even when women's work provided more of the actual food. When the plow was introduced, men took on a larger role in farming. Plowing requires significant upper body strength and is more physically demanding than hoeing. Using animals to pull plows also required strength and skill. Some societies developed elaborate culture beliefs around these gender divisions. For example, the idea that women's fertility would transfer to rice crops if women did the transplanting. But here's the key point. While these gender divisions may have made some practical sense in agricultural societies, they established patterns of thinking about what is men's work and women's work, and that would persist long after the practical justification disappeared. This is a perfect example of how work organization can outlast the conditions that originally created it. Agricultural food surpluses created possibilities that simply didn't exist in gathering hunting societies. For the first time, significant numbers of people could be supported without directly producing food. This led to occupational specialization on a scale never seen previously. Towns and cities emerged as centers where the specialists could live and work. Potters, metalworkers, weavers, priests, administrators, and traders could all find customers and resources in urban areas. The word civilization literally comes from civitas, the Latin word for city. Living in cities was seen as a mark of advanced human society. But agricultural surpluses also enabled less beneficial development. Large armies became possible because food could be stored to feed soldiers who weren't farming. Better weapons could be made by specialized metalworkers. Wars became larger and more destructive because agricultural societies had more people, more resources, and better weapons than gathering hunting groups. Warfare was usually men's work for both biological and practical reasons. The demands of pregnancy, nursing, and childcare made women less suitable for prolonged combat. But warfare also may have appealed to men who could no longer get excitement from hunting large animals. Combat provided an alternative outlet for demonstrating skill, courage, and physical prowess. Large populations and territories also required new forms of government. Simple face-to-face leadership that worked in small gathering hunting bands was not adequate for managing thousands or millions of people. This led to the development of bureaucracies with specialized roles, written records, and hierarchical authority structures, which are the ancestors of modern organizational forms. In advanced pre-industrial agricultural societies, about 3 to 5% of the population worked as specialized artisans. This might not sound like much, but remember that 90 to 95% of people were still farmers, producing the food that supported everyone else. These artisans were potters, smiths, spinners, weavers, brewers, cabinet makers. They represented a significant departure from the agricultural mainstream. Artisan work required something new in human history, highly specialized skills that could take years to master. A blacksmith couldn't just wake up one day and decide to become a weaver. Each craft required extensive training and practice. This led to the development of apprenticeship systems, where young people spent years learning from master craftsmen. Artisan work also required significant physical strength and endurance. Remember, there were no electric motors or pneumatic tools. Everything was done with hand tools powered by human muscles, occasionally supplemented by animal power. Blacksmithing, in particular, was incredibly physically demanding, swinging heavy hammers for hours in extreme heat. But artisans did have access to other power sources. Water wheels were quite common. The Domesday Book recorded over 5,000 in 11th century England alone. These powered grain mills, cloth fulling machines, sawmills, and even forged hammers and bellows. Wind power was less common, but important in places like the Netherlands, where windmills pumped water from reclaimed land. Most craft enterprises were small-scale family operations with maybe a dozen workers at most. This kept production flexible and personal, but it also limited how much could be produced. The putting out system represents a fascinating transition between independent craftwork and industrial production. It emerged in the Flemish wool industry during the Middle Ages and spread throughout Europe. Here's how it worked. Entrepreneurial merchants would buy raw wool and distribute it to peasants and small artisans who would card, spin, and weave it into cloth in their own homes. The merchant would then collect the finished cloth, pay the workers, and sell the cloth at market. The system had advantages for both sides. Workers could earn money at home during agricultural slack seasons when there wasn't much field work to do. They could combine textile work with farming and childcare. For merchants, it provided a large flexible workforce without the overhead of maintaining a factory. But the system was heavily tilted in favor of the merchants. They controlled both the supply of raw materials and the market for finished goods, which gave them enormous power over pricing. Workers often found themselves in debt to merchants and had to use their spinning wheels and looms as collateral for loans. If they defaulted, which was common, they lost their tools and became completely dependent on the merchant for work. Workers did have some ways to fight back. They could sell the materials provided by merchants and substitute inferior materials, pocketing the difference. They could cut corners on quality when supervision was minimal. But overall, the putting out system represented a step toward the separation of workers from ownership of their tools and materials, a key feature of capitalism. This system occupies a crucial position in work history, sitting between independent craft production and factory-based industrial production. One of the most profound changes in human work history involved how people thought about and organized time. For most of human existence, work was governed by natural rhythms, the cycles of plants and animals. For gatherers and hunters, the seasons for farmers, the completion of specific projects for artisans. Traditional societies had very relaxed attitudes toward time and scheduling. Anthropologist Gideon Sorberg observed that in pre-industrial cities, merchants and handicraft workers generally did not adhere to any fixed schedule. Shopkeepers open and close their shops as they fit. They may open one morning at 9, the next at 10, and so on. This flexibility reflected a fundamentally different relationship between work and life. Work wasn't something you did for specific hours in a specific place. It was integrated into the rhythm of daily life. You worked when the work needed to be done, rested when you could, and adjusted your schedule based on weather, seasons, family needs, and social obligations. But this began to change with the invention of mechanical timepieces and the need to coordinate the activities of larger groups of people. The first systematic time scheduling actually appeared in medieval monasteries, where monks needed to coordinate prayers and collective labor. 8 specific times were set aside for prayer each day, from dawn to evening. This monastic scheduling established the principle that time could be divided into units, and that human activities could be organized around these artificial divisions rather than natural rhythms. The Protestant Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther in 1517, was much more than a religious movement. It fundamentally changed how people thought about work, time, and economic life. Luther challenged not just Catholic theology, but the entire medieval social and economic order. Protestantism quickly fragmented into many different sects, each with its own vision of proper Christian life, but they shared some common themes that would prove crucial for economic development: an emphasis on individual responsibility, the importance of worldly success as a sign of divine favor, and a rejection of the medieval Catholic suspicion of wealth accumulation. This religious transformation coincided with other major changes: the invention of printing, the growth of cities, the expansion of trade, and the development of new financial institutions. Together, these changes created the conditions for a new kind of economic system that we now call capitalism. The key insight here is that major economic changes do not happen in isolation. They are accompanied by changes in culture, values, technology, and social organization. Understanding this helps us make sense of our current economic transformations as well. Calvin's theology was particularly important for economic development. Calvin taught predestination. Predestination is the belief that an all-powerful God has already determined who will go to heaven and who will go to hell, and that nothing that humans do can change this decision. Well, this might seem like a doctrine that would make people passive and fatalistic, but it actually had the opposite effect. Calvinists were desperate for signs that they were among God's select, and the material success in this life was seen as the most reliable indicator. If you were prospering economically, it suggested that God was blessing you because you were destined for salvation. Okay, this was a revolutionary idea because traditional Christianity had been deeply suspicious of wealth. Remember Jesus saying it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. But Calvinism turned wealth accumulation into a religious duty. However, wealth had to be acquired the right way, through hard work and frugality and honest dealings. And it couldn't be spent on luxury or self-indulgence. Profits were supposed to be reinvested in productive enterprises. And this is what created what we now call the Protestant work ethic, the idea that hard work is morally good and success is a sign of virtue. Calvinists also had a very different attitude toward time. Like money, time was seen as a precious resource given by God that shouldn't be wasted. Time is money is more than just a saying. It is a moral principle. Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1905, argued that Protestant religious beliefs were crucial to the development of modern capitalism. Weber pointed out that capitalism first flourished in predominant Protestant areas, England, Scotland, the Netherlands, and Protestant regions of Germany and France, while Catholic areas like Spain and Italy remain more traditional. But Weber's thesis remains controversial more than a century later. One, because it's hard to prove that religious beliefs directly cause economic behavior, especially when we're talking about people who died centuries ago. How can we really know what motivated a 17th century Dutch merchant? Weber himself acknowledged that once capitalism got started, it no longer needed religious motivation to keep going. The competitive pressure of the market forced people to behave in capitalistic ways, regardless of their personal beliefs. But he did argue that Protestant religious beliefs were necessary to get capitalism started in the first place. An alternative explanation focuses on literacy rather than theology. The Protestants emphasized reading the Bible for yourself. Combining this with the invention of printing with movable type led to much higher literacy rates among Protestants than Catholics. And literacy was crucial for business success. You need to be able to read contracts, keep accounts, and learn new techniques and opportunities. So maybe Protestant economic success had more to do with education than theology. This is still being debated by historians and sociologists today. As we wrap up this historical survey, I want you to think about how these early patterns of work organization continue to influence our working lives today. The gender-based division of labor that we saw in gathering, hunting, and agricultural societies persist in modern occupational segregation. The Protestant work ethic continues to influence how Americans think about the relationship between hard work and moral virtue. The time discipline that began in medieval monasteries and expanded with mechanical clocks now governs our entire working lives. Understanding this historical background helps us see that our current work arrangements are not natural or inevitable. They're the product of specific historical developments. This perspective will be crucial as we move forward in the class to examine how industrialization, technological change, and globalization continue to transform the world of work. Our next chapter, we'll see how industrial revolution built on these foundations to create the modern world of work with both its tremendous productivity and new forms of alienation and inequality.